Capital raise in the US, really, your approach for that really depends on where you are and what stage you are in terms of your growth. So are you more on the early side or on the later side? If you're on the earlier side, that's going to look a little bit different. But whatever the case, you're going to want to establish your presence in the US first. So setting up your entity, just because people take you a lot more seriously when you have an address, a physical address in the United States. It gives them some comfort that that you are serious about entering the U.S. market. And then it depends on how much you're looking to raise. So if it's on the smaller side, you're probably going to be speaking mostly with angel investors and some of the smaller seed funds. If it's on the larger side, then you're going to be talking more with family offices, possibly venture capital firms. And there are folks that lie in between. And in terms of getting introductions, there are a number of different approaches. So you could, for example, hire a consultant to run your roadshow and make the introductions to the investors. You could bring on board advisors that will help make those introductions. You could network on your own, which tends to take a little bit longer, but that can be effective. And then once you've got your first few investors, generally they don't want to invest just on their own, so they'll bring in other investors, and that makes it a little bit easier. So once you get an investor really excited about your company, they can act as an advocate for other investors and other folks who are interested as well, and that tends to help. What I've seen the most with companies coming from Europe is should first and foremost leave your assumptions at home about the US market, leave your assumptions about where you are in your journey. It takes a lot of discovery to enter the US market. It's not, one of the biggest differences between market entry in Europe and the US is that the markets here are a lot smaller. And so you enter the market a lot faster, whereas in the US, it's a huge market and you want to enter it a little bit more slowly because you need to have a tight strategy for it, and that takes some pilots, it takes some testing, it takes some validation, and then also it's expensive, and depending on whether or not you're direct to consumer or you're B2B. Direct to consumer is very expensive. You have a huge amount of competition. And so you need to make sure that your strategy is the right one, and that when you have your first meetings with investors, you have a very tight pitch. You've gone through, what you're presenting, why you're presenting it. You've gotten feedback from others on the deck. Your communication is clear, you're presenting well, because that first impression makes a big difference. There is very little from an American investor perspective to separate you from anyone else from anywhere in the world or even within the US. And you want to make a good first impression because you'll rarely get a second chance if you make a bad first impression. So don't automatically assume that you're ready for that conversation. Get some feedback from advisors or consultants or experts, maybe participate in an accelerator program, and make sure that you are very comfortable and you have validation for your level of comfort before having those conversations. So for the US market specifically, I would say, spend a year doing minimum research on the US market and on your sector specifically. Talk to folks, talk to potential customers, get feedback from them. A lot of times what I've seen is companies will come over with a product that's worked well in a European market, and they've pursued a very specific strategy for that market. And they might assume when they come to the US they would do the same thing, but that's not the case. It's a very different market. And depending on which sector you're in, it could be either highly regulated or not as regulated. So for example, fintech is a very highly regulated space, it tends to have its own dynamics, and the path is very distinct from the path in other sectors. So you want to make sure that you have a strong understanding of what that market looks like, what the sector looks like, what you're bringing. A lot of times your customers will tell you what your product is. You might have an idea of what the product is in your head, but it turns out to be something different. I have this slide that I like to show people, which is, it's a multiple Venn diagrams combined together for prop tech, and a lot of European startups and companies haven't heard of prop tech. It's still maybe 5-7 years old, but it intersects a lot of different sectors. And so when we were recruiting companies to come to the U.S. for the prop tech sector specifically, because New York is a key headquarters, a key hotspot for prop tech, they never thought of themselves as a prop tech company. They'd say, well, I'm a fintech company, or I'm a real estate tech company, or I'm focused on clean energy. And the fact is that the product can change, like in terms of what solution that you're providing, depending on the sector and what that product market fit is. So I think that's really helpful when looking at what your go-to-market strategy is in the US. So prop tech is basically any solution for the real estate market. So it could be, and it even crosses over into construction technology. So it could be anything on the inside, like automatic security systems. It could be remote sensors that provide real-time feedback, like the Internet of Things. It could be clean energy solutions. So New York, for example, has a great demand for clean energy solutions for buildings because there are mandates to make all of the buildings carbon neutral at a certain year. And so the buildings have to be retrofitted. And then generally, because of the competition for residents, both on the commercial space, especially now, but even in the residential space, any kind of amenity that you could provide, a tech or amenity that you could provide in the building is valuable. So property managers, property owners are much more open to talking with tech companies, or have been historically in the past, I would say 4 years in this space, and it's grown tremendously, I think. So and there's major conferences, VCs focus, and accelerator programs focus specifically on prop tech in New York now. I think before we go into that, it's important to understand, how you define success. And I think a lot of folks that define success as becoming a unicorn. And if you're not a unicorn in 5 years, you're not successful. But I think, with looking at the numbers, 9 out of 10 startups fail. I think success is coming to the right conclusion. If the U.S. market, you're either going to work because of timing, the market timing, and you have the right product for that timing, and you're going to do well. I think, if you've come to the realization that strategic partnerships are the best approach in your go-to-market strategy, depending on the sector, and where you are in terms of size and how much capital you have, which is also really important. You would pursue it a little bit differently. Sometimes strategic partnerships are oriented around your customers, and you want to leverage your customers to help you grow. Other times, it might be around a potential distribution channel or a partner that might help you with marketing. So I think it depends on what product you have, which sector you're in. But, you know, it is definitely something that should be considered, and you should go through the options, you know, with your particular product and service. And a lot of the companies that I've spoken with so far here, that has come up a lot. So specifically with, you know, scaling, I guess, you know, internationally, I think most people think of either East Asia or the US as the big opportunities. For the US specifically, on the upside, you have the largest consumer market in the world, and with huge disposable income, large disposable income. That's the opportunity generally. I think in terms of what are the pitfalls or the challenges, it's highly competitive. So, you know, you can't, there's no easy street, and there's a number, at least a dozen people working on the same product or solution that you are at any given time. So it really comes down to who's going to execute better and who can move faster. And then, you know, for a lot of businesses coming into the U.S. market, as I mentioned, the assumptions that you might have. If you don't have validation with your customers, with advisors, with investors, and even experts, which could be coaches and mentors, that you are on the right path. And a lot of times this is a lot of testing and iteration. And you think that, you know, the plan that you had in your head before you came to the U.S. market is the only one, that's going to be a huge challenge for you. It's going to be a tough road, because you do need to be a little humble and open-minded coming in, and understand that, you know, you have a specific goal when you come to the U.S. market. And, you know, yes, everybody wants to make a lot of money and be successful, but you have to have, you know, a plan and tight metrics, and understand, you know, if you're on the right path, and if you're not, how to pivot or change a little bit. So I think I look at those as the biggest challenges. And of course, there are the small everyday challenges like immigration and visas, you know, barriers to entry for specific industries, and then just figuring out, you know, issues related to employees and whatnot. But those are universal to all businesses. If you're coming to the U.S. market and hiring your team, the first piece of advice, one of the first people you should be talking to is an attorney. So I recommend shopping around for an attorney. Speak to a minimum of 3. The initial consultation is usually free, maybe up to 5. And pick one that you're most comfortable with, that you have a good rapport with, that you feel that you could trust their advice, and they understand what you're trying to achieve with your business. And then really rely on them to help you navigate the complexities. The U.S. market, in addition to being highly competitive, is also very complex. Because it's so large, things become very specialized. There are people whose only job is to consult on specific types of approvals and regulation, like FDA, for example. And so it's important to have your attorney make sure that you're protected from any potential future litigation, including from your employees, because the U.S. is a highly litigious market, and that does give a lot of Europeans pause when coming over. But if you have the attorney guiding you from day one, then that should give you a lot more comfort. And also, a lot of attorneys have become flexible with how they structure their billing, because they understand that startups don't necessarily have a huge amount of money. So you don't have to hire the best. There's a lot of really great attorneys out there, and that are looking to work with companies entering the U.S. And then what I've seen is generally the first hire is usually a country manager, who has really strong sales experience in that particular vertical. And then they generally are the ones that lead the hiring of the rest of the team. And so it's really up to you as the founder to set the tone and the expectations and the culture for the company in the US, and make sure that there's a balance between how you've done things and how you want to do things here in Serbia, and then also how things are done in the US. And I've seen this over and over with the Nordic companies coming from Scandinavia. They have strong Nordic values that are part of the business culture, and they want that to be a part of the culture in the US. And so it's about finding that balance. A lot of times they bring the US team to Stockholm or Oslo to meet the team there. And so they build those relationships, and they look at it as a long-term thing. In the US, it's like, things move very quickly, especially in New York. Like, people are hired quickly, they're fired quickly, they quit or whatever. So there's a lot less stickiness than here in Europe, and I think that's something that you have to keep in mind when approaching the US. And so HR experts or consultants and an attorney to help you with employment labor law will be invaluable. I think I haven't been involved with selling in Europe specifically, but from what I've observed, the markets in Europe are a lot smaller, and so you have to customize and focus on localization a lot more in Europe than you do in the US. In the US, you can pretty much cover the entire country with one plan, one marketing plan, one sales plan, whereas in Europe, you have to tackle it country by country and sometimes regions within countries. And so that's a much different process than in the US. Yeah, I think, especially for a country like Serbia, which is a smaller market, it probably doesn't have as developed of an investor industry as the US does, which it's huge. One thing to keep in mind is that there's a tremendous amount of specialization. So there are investors that focus on specific sectors or specific areas within specific sectors. So like, I'm only focused on hardware solutions for clean energy, for example. Whereas I think here you'd see an investor who, if he just likes your idea and believes in you, will put some money in. And I think those are two extreme examples, but I think they illustrate the reality of coming to the U.S. market. So I think you want to know, firstly that it is complex, and it's not just about getting the money from somebody. It's getting money from the right person, and so that goes into the second thing, which is, especially if you're looking for institutional money, so like VC money, that's a long-term relationship that you want to be very careful about. You don't want to say yes to the first person that offers you a check. You want to, we call it investor dating. So you want to make sure that when you marry this investor for the long term, you're comfortable with that what they are, how they see the company and how you see the company are aligned, because generally they do have a lot of control. If they're not happy with how things are going, they will make changes within the company that you may or may not have a say in, and so that's important to keep in mind as well. And then remember, communication, how you present and what you talk about is super important. I think one of the things that we've seen is that you need a story. You need a good story to sort of separate. You can't just have a great product. It's actually more about the idea and the story than it is about how amazing your product is, like, in the moment. the assumption is if you have a strong team, you'll get to an amazing product if you don't already have one. But they really want to understand your vision, and you also really want to excite them with what your story is for the company. I would say that one of my observations in the cultural difference that I've seen here, and that I think is good to be mindful of, is the US is very highly risk tolerant. You know, there's this saying, fail fast and fail often. And as long as you are making incremental progress in some way, like this in your own, and the small failures are sort of and they become learnings rather than, you know, something that people should be ashamed of. I think trying to develop that mentality, and also a growth mindset coming into the U.S. market is very helpful, because it'll help you move a lot faster than being a little bit more cautious, a little bit more conservative, a little bit maybe even intimidated. You know, yes, it's a big market, but come in with both humility and confidence, and a positive mindset, and you'll be very successful. And just because of those factors, I think, and so I would keep that in mind. I've only spoken with a handful, but the ones that I've spoken with all seem U.S. market ready. They have good products and services, and you know, just with a few adjustments, if they can sort of do the things that I mentioned, which is the research and talking with people and making sure they're on the right track, I think they have a good chance.